I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby, here with Alex Patsavas, the music supervisor of Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story. And Alex, I always like to get this right out of the way because I feel like it gives a good kind of baseline for where we're going to go. I think there are still, even after all this time, there's people who maybe don't understand the role of the music supervisor, and I think it's always a good time to re-educate people about your role.
And a question that I can answer, with certainty. So that's I appreciate that question for sure. A music supervisor is hired and is hired by the showrunner in series, often by the director and producers in film, and by the ad agency, for any marketing assets or commercials, to really help define the signature sound of a project. So I was hired by Shondaland, by Shonda Rhimes, Tom Verica, and Betsy Beers to help define that signature. That might include any on camera, anything that's on camera, source cues, helping to define and refine what the score might sound like. And the unsexy part of the job, of course, is clearance work, which is also essential to the job, which is monitoring the episodic as well as a singular episode's budget and making sure that the songs that are in that episode or film or marketing asset are licensed for the rights that are needed.
Yeah, and of course, as with anything in the Bridgerton universe, there are so many elements that come into play. But I feel like, and I said this to Chris Bowers, the composer, who you've worked with extensively and who I've talked to extensively, that Queen Charlotte feels like it has a different feel to it than just a standard Bridgerton show. And I'm wondering, it's clear that was intentional. Why was it important to you that it have its own standalone sound?
I mean, I think for me, and especially after having early conversations with Shonda Rhimes, I think it was necessary to define a through line to make sure that there was a relatability to Bridgerton, but also that Queen Charlotte, and by extension, Queen Charlotte and King George's love story, had a singular voice, and that voice be distinctive to her story, to their story. I'm glad you talked to Chris about it. We have worked together extensively, and I think I'm sure he talked about his inspiration and how he really dug into the Georgian era, and unlike Bridgerton, which takes place in Regency, Queen Charlotte sort of skips back and forth. I'm assuming your viewers have all seen it by now, and so I'm not tossing out any spoilers. But there is a little back and forth, and the music was different. But Chris relied on some of those original inspirations from the era, but also, as he always does, made it so clearly his own.
Yeah, and one of those inspirations clearly was the Chevalier de Saint George, and who was somebody that I knew very little about going into this, and but who really had this kind of impact that not a lot of people know about.
I mean, I think I was lucky enough to talk about the show recently, and I was asked, like, what was the most surprising thing, and you're asking you're asking that question, and I have that answer, which is I did not know a lot about him. Chevalier de Saint George was famous in the Georgian era, was a composer, an instrumentalist, a championship fencer, and the first African man with French, also with French roots, that had widespread critical acclaim, and had and I did not know a ton about him, but certainly we used 7 of his pieces throughout the series, and I know Chris also felt the same way. We both did a lot of research and a lot of listening, and it was such an interesting and sadly, sort of not highlighted talent, which is who is getting his due.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also, I think I hear like, in researching it, but I also hear it because I'm a classical music fan myself.
Right.
I hear like echoes of Handel and Haydn coming into that. And what I find so interesting is, for somebody in your position, I would imagine you would have to have kind of like an extensive background, or at least the ability to do really extensive research into the time period.
Well, I mean, I think that's always been my, one of my favorite parts of being a music supervisor, which is, discovering music of any era, unearthing, I'm clearly many people knew about Chevalier de St. George. I did not. But I do think we know about sort of the iconic greats of the time, Haydn and, Mozart and Handel, Purcell, and, St. George should be sitting amongst them.
And so in the influences and in those classical pieces, what goes through your mindset when you're like picking and choosing the kind of sounds that support a specific scene or a specific moment?
Well, I think I always start with the scripts, and something that I think is so important to think about as a supervisor is that we are enhancing the drama, we are helping to tell the story, and sort of sitting alongside the production designer, the costumer, and taking, music of, obviously, we think about music early, and something that I've always done with Shonda is start to have that conversation in the script phase, but it's after it's been the actors have been cast, you are looking at dailies or looking at footage. And that's when that's when I really can start to think about making sure that the music is in lockstep with those other creative elements. And I think for Charlotte, obviously, as we've spoken about, 7 Chevalier de St. George pieces, there are actually 30 source pieces that hopefully seamlessly, flow with Chris's beautiful score. And finally, I think we definitely wanted to think about covers for Charlotte that had become a signature for Bridgerton, which is sort of iconic pop songs done, orchestral versions, either quartets or small ensembles. For Charlotte, we felt like it was very important to tell her story by leaning into songs written, performed, or made famous by women of color. And so that was something we talked about early. Not every cover was decided upon in advance. I think we've talked about this before. They happen all through the process. Sometimes it's the first song that an editor might try in the cut. Sometimes, there's sort of 40 tries later. But feel really strongly about the Alicia Keys. We have not 1, not 2, but 3 Beyonce tracks in Queen Charlotte. I'm very proud of that. And so happy that she was excited to participate by lending her compositions, to the show. And, one of my favorite moments in the show is I Will Always Love You, which is, I think, used very powerfully to tell 2 love stories, really.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that, but I want to really delve into the Alicia Keys choice, which I thought, and it wasn't until in preparation for our chat that I realized that this is the 20th anniversary.
The 20th anniversary.
And you have not just the cover that's used in the show, but you have Alicia Keys re-recording it with an orchestra, 70-piece ensemble made up of women of color.
Right. And an international group of women as well, it was so cool. Did you talk to Chris about it at all?
I didn't. We just ran out of time, but
Right.
that, I mean, it's so cool the way that kind of comes together, because it does seem to fit in so seamlessly with the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I did not, when the Alicia Keys track was selected for the show, which was quite early on, I did not realize it was the 20th anniversary. That was like the most delightful sort of thing we might mark that happened after. So it was not, I had no idea. We were just thinking about the stories, Charlotte and George's love story, but to and really to watch that group of women come together, and for Alicia to reimagine her, her really iconic track, and of course, in a Queen Charlotte setting, with all of it was just so marvelous to see it come together. Chris actually produced that track, but they recorded at Air Studios in London, just like, and I know that I'm sure you've read a little bit about what Alicia's sort of said about it. I think and what Shonda said about it. It was just like a beautiful thing to have come together.
Well, and speaking of Shonda, when I spoke to Shonda, one of the things that I really took away from was the fact that she wanted the George character in particular to be human rather than just a series be defined by his mental illness. And I feel like the music choices or surrounding George really kind of support that. But I love the use of the Deja Vu track, by the way. I just love that. Was that equally important to you?
Yes. I mean, I think they have a complicated, real, like sort of stunning story. And I think just remembering back, of course, as a supervisor, anybody who's worked on the show, you've experienced, you've lived with it for months and months, but remembering reading the pages as Shonda was releasing scripts and sort of understanding that the journey that I was going on as a reader and that, the viewer was going to go on, it was, and I think, the first episode is such a sort of magnetic and beautiful episode, but I don't think the audience realizes quite where they're going to go. And so, yes, like the humanity, super important. And also just, understanding again, like how music could accomplish the same sorts of things, that like just the costumes, the beautiful hair, the set design, so much grounded in the Georgian era, and yet, certainly a fictional retelling that, sort of looking to Shonda, to Tom Verica, to Betsy Beers for my cues as to, how far were we going to go with it, and what were going to be the best sort of song and sound choices. One thing that I want to just talk about briefly is Chris Bowers and Taylor Parks wrote an original song. There's a wedding. It's in the wedding. And, that was written specifically for that moment. They wrote it together, performed it together, and very cool to see that piece come together. Because I remember spotting it, in our spotting session, and I think it was either temp or something that was, was a placeholder for what that was going to become. And I think that is one of my favorite musical moments. in the
You know,
show.
I'm actually so glad that you mentioned the spotting sessions, because in talking to other music supervisors, it to a T, it's one of their favorite
It's so great.
parts of it. And why do you love it so much?
Well, I love who's in the meeting. So it's, it's a you know, creators, producers, directors, post, music editor, and of course the composer. And we used to do it, excuse me, used to do it in a physical room. They still happen in physical rooms. But I think one of the interesting thing that's happened post-COVID is a really seamless system for being able to do a spotting session virtually. And that was something that was, I'm sure, happened for extremely technically advanced people, but it would have been a little bit beyond me, but pre-COVID. And we go through that group of people, goes through a locked cut, not any of the versions before, so the composer can truly compose to what is finished. And we crawl through the episode and at sort of a delightfully slow speed and really speak about score. Is it going to be score? Is it going to be silent? Is the song that's tempting the right one? Are we trying for more? So that is what a spotting session is. Typically, if an episode was an hour, it might take two and a quarter to really complete a thorough spot.
Is there a moment during those where you're watching it and you know that it's right? Is there a moment where you just get a feeling? Does that just come with experience? How would you define that?
I think there are moments where that that it's right, and there are moments that that it is wrong. So I think I think both things happen. You know, depending on where we might be in the sequence of a show, in the is it episode 6? Is it episode 1? Chris would have been working on score and themes, and so as you progress through a season of a series, more and more, for example, of Chris's score would be available to be temped. And so you sort of, the first episode is always really the start of that conversation. And I think quite a lot of sort of iterations happen with the first episode as we move through the season. As I said, the sound is more defined. But yes, you have moments where you're like, oh my God, that's perfect. Or gosh, I feel like we need to, I feel like the music supervisor needs to try some more things because it's not where it should be.
So when you reach the end of the process and the project is out, do you, just as a viewer, go back? Are you able to remove yourself from it a little bit, or is that just too difficult?
No, I think I really can. And once in a while I find myself doing it even in the spots, where you sort of get taken away by the acting, by sort of staring at the screen and being swept away by what's happening. But I think it's important, and I think it's sort of celebratory to watch it after release. During those spots, the sound effects are temp. The music hasn't been mixed in the way that it should be yet. For example, even if we've already decided on a song, the music editor, in this case, a really talented fellow named Sean, might be playing around with levels, re-editing, digging into stems, and making sure that he's sort of putting forward, and the music editor works on both the score and the source. And so it's really fun to watch it later. And of course, the other thing is putting together the soundtrack. And enjoying that process of seeing the soundtrack come out into the world.
Well, Alex, congratulations. As usual, just absolutely wonderful work on this show. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout Emmy season. Alex Patsavas from Queen Charlotte, always great to talk to you. Thank you.
Great to talk to you. Thank you so much. It's so fun and easy to talk to you and to talk about Queen Charlotte.